Thank you all so much for coming out tonight to see Ethan's talk. I am delighted to have Ethan here with us tonight. Ethan created a stunning and exciting body of work for his exhibition, Beyond the Sidewalk, that features a collection of functional vessels and sculptures inspired by urban decay. Ethan's attention to detail, not only for his ceramic work, but also in discovering the world around him, is commendable. It is easy to get lost in the globs of glaze, the flight of the butterflies, and the whimsical characters that he imparts on his hydrants. Beyond the Sidewalk demands the viewer to rethink their perceptions of the overlooked, disregarded, and abandoned objects that surround us every day. It has been my absolute pleasure to see this body of work come together, and a joy to witness Ethan's tenacity and enthusiasm. Ethan earned his BFA in ceramics from Massachusetts College of Art and Design and is currently completing his 2-year artist residency at the Morean Center for Clay in Saint Pete. I would just ask that you all silence your cell phones at this time, and then after Ethan speaks, we'll have a brief Q&A. So, Ethan, welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys all for coming in. I'm really excited to be presenting this whole body of work with everybody. It's kind of a culmination of a long time me thinking about certain objects that have existed around, that we all exist around. And it means a lot to finally have been able to bring all this work together into a real focused body and share what I find exciting about these forms. So I grew up in the central Vermont area. This is the house that I grew up in, out in the woods in the middle of nowhere. What was a big juxtaposition between where I came from and where I ended up going as I grew as an artist after high school was I ended up in the center of a very large city, not a very large city, Boston, but for me it was the biggest place I'd ever been. And one thing that I was really kind of surprised about was just all of the objects that I was seeing around me that I'd never really noticed before. I'd done a lot of work in the past, mural work, where I'd really like to bring these bright and illustrative colors into my pieces. This is a piece that's in Worcester, central Vermont, that's on a lady's house, a good friend of ours. And it's just the bursting energy of the summer flower field, right? And I just found so much love in creating paintings like this and using these color schemes that really were explosive. That being said, I was also really interested in the industrial side of things. This is the first piece I actually did in 2015 as a large-scale mural. I was in my junior year of high school, and our local auto body shop requested that I do a mural piece for them. And I think this piece really kind of displays a real jumping point for me, where I was really interested in kind of creating illusion in my work and using 2D to express something further than that, this three-dimensional world, and something deeper and something that's just through the other side of the wall, right? So I actually used I took a photo of the inside of the shop, and I created everything from a little sketch and a layered sketch where I actually used the photo, so the background is exactly what you'd see if you did punch a hole through the wall. And the Volkswagen Bug, which was always out front of the shop and kind of was their little motto vehicle. But again, just all these like little industrial artifacts and these color schemes started to kind of come out of me, and I didn't really know where from, but I just had so much joy in making these things. Awesome. So then I ended up down in Boston, Massachusetts. You can see this is me on the right, making a very large pot. And you can see a very stark difference from where I'm from. We've got a very industrial setting. And these are some of the things I was running into as I was moving about in Boston. And I'm always surprised how few people notice them. They're striking to me. And all their different shapes and forms. My brother is an industrial designer. I mentioned that a few times to folks who've been in here for the past few minutes. And so I'm always kind of looking at things from a design perspective, and these objects that are made out of this cast material that's supposed to be withstanding the test of time impermanently, they show their wear and their tear on them. But some of these things have been working for over 70 years and are still hooked onto the public water system right now doing their job. And they may not have ever been used in that time, but the one time they are used, they have to work, and they do. And so the aesthetics are just a cherry on top when it comes to how interesting these are as forms and their utility. And as a potter and a ceramicist, I'm always thinking about utility and surface and form. And there's some discrepancies that hide within these hydrants. You know, they're falling apart right in front of you. I've picked the bolt right off the end of them before. That's rusted to that level. But nobody's gonna come and change it until the time comes, you know? So I find that they really kind of are sneaky, and they hide and they show their character. So this is kind of what my work ended up doing in that time. It started to bend and shift. This is from back in 2017. I started making pots that were reminiscent of these industrial artifacts and these facades and surfaces that I was seeing as I moved about. And I was also looking at work by people like Mike Sinelli, who's a prominent ceramicist, makes a lot of really nice porcelain pieces that show some of this same wear and tear effect. And I was just really kind of locked into trying to represent some of these surfaces and forms I was seeing, but through clay. And in a utilitarian way as well, which kind of reimposes function onto these items which are beat and torn, falling apart, and might be losing that. So this last photo I showed you is the top of a hydrant, and the top of a pot that I emulated that sweet little top on. And this is post-firing in a salt firing, the little mug that goes with it. You'll notice in some of this work too, the circular handles on things, the nuts and bolts and pieces that are coming off of them. I was starting to use plaster and get into some mold making to make those handles and the bolts and items. So that was when kind of mold making started to creep into my work as a tool for me to kind of express these different ideas around functionality and decay and industrial detritus. This is the big pot that I was throwing on the wheel in the beginning, and the likely suspect for what inspired it. I had to dig through photos going way back. But you'll notice in this piece on the top right, the same circles that were on the last piece. So this is me realizing, all right, these molds are pretty cool. You know, I can put them on this pot, and I put them on that pot, I can have them coming off of a mug, and it just became this way to replicate forms, which I had a lot of fun doing. On the left is a piece that I found once I got down to Saint Pete 2 years ago along the water. And on the right is one that I found in 2018 in Japan while I was on a trip with my ceramics class. We went on a big 14-day trip around central Japan to south central Japan and visited tons of studios. But I mean, I dig through those photos too. I was sneaking little pictures of these hydrants from different times and places. And I was just so enamored by all this writing on the side. I couldn't tell you what any of it is. I don't read Japanese, right? But each and every one, crossing cultures, they kind of have this similar language. They have writing, place and time, where they're from. And a lot of them have the similar, just a cap on the front, a cap on the top, if not a couple more. So this language was kind of carrying through to all these different places I was going, and I kind of couldn't look away after I started seeing it. Some more images from my travels in Japan. I was also, at the same time, starting to really get into just ideas around gravity, balance, and I was seeing we saw a lot of gardens in Japan, rock gardens and sculpture gardens that really kind of inspired me to kind of push into some new directions and kind of tear apart my ideas around like gravity and balance a little bit more. Stacking stones has been something that I've done for a very long time. It's a bit of a meditation, and I wanted to carry that into my work as well. So my trip to Japan kind of opportunely balanced all of those ideas and kind of brought everything together a bit. Again, these two items are objects I found in Japan that kind of carried these surfaces that I was interested in starting to wrap my mind around. Upon getting back, these are some of the pieces that I was making. some smaller pieces on the right. We've got actually found bolts and nuts from the train track along Huntington Avenue. And then the piece above it is all clay. And that little glaze that's tucked in there in the center, that's the same glaze that I used on the very large hydrant piece, and as well on the flowers on the self-portrait. So this glaze has been a material that I've kind of carried with me, and it's represented a lot to me in different ways. It's an extremely toxic glaze. It's got just about everything toxic in it that you can imagine. So in a way, it feels a bit like playing with fire, but for some reason that always makes me a little more excited to finish a piece. It gives me a little more wind behind my sails. So both of these pieces are fairly toxic, and I mean this piece seems like a warning in and of itself. You know, it's got the red. It seems like someone's bleeding, and it's coming out of this bright green sesame moss. So pushing all of those symbols together became really important. And my slip casting work was starting to take off a little bit more. These are all pieces from molds and molds that I cut apart and reattached together. So this is a PVC tube originally that I took a plaster mold off of, cut it to all these angles, reattached together, and the bottom in the center is from a talc bottle. It's an old talc bottle from a thrift store. It even had the price tag still on it, and in my original mold you can see the price tag. It had that much detail. So the plaster just offered me a lot to do when it came to kind of putting symbols together and putting these elements together. And you'll see that glaze again on this piece representing a lichen. My mold making finally kind of took more of a jump. I made my first cast mug. So that was the mug, and then the handle, which had come from my molds. Juxtaposed the big piece next to it. Those are kind of the two angles that my mold making jumped. And then I really started to try to figure out how to kind of turn into the direction of bringing my stone balancing into my actual practice. I was lucky to have a lot of photographers around me when I was in undergrad who would document when we'd go out and do stuff, stack stones, visit different places. I did a lot of traveling around the Northeast while I was in school. And I really had a lot of time to kind of let this practice grow into a lot of different things. So these are all stacked stones that are all just connected by the points of balance. There's nothing else holding them there. But it became this kind of practice in what's improbable but not impossible. And I had somebody describe it to me just as that when I was at Haystack about 4 or 5 years ago. And I've always loved that description. It's just a representation of what's already there. And just the same as the stones lying on the ground, it could be standing on end. And there's no circumstance to me why it couldn't be like that. And I take that mindset into it, and oftentimes things like this happen. And it means that this practice means a lot to me. So I tried to actually bring it into more into my work, more into my ceramic work, which ended up in this kind of conglomerate of stuff happening. I was messing around with glass, doing some flame working. Everything is on these little glass stilts, and the stones are slip cast. So I made forms of each one of these. They're actually not stones at all. They're thrown forms on the wheel that I paddled into shape, and took molds off of each one of them. So they're really lightweight, and they pose no risk for the glass snapping or anything like that. So this work was really kind of pushing that, like improbable but not impossible, and bringing that same love for the stack kind of into my ceramic work. However, it was a little too literal for me, and I couldn't get away from that like love of color and that need for those bright colors that were in that work earlier. So I got into a whole series of work that was centered around light, color, subtle shifts in time, gravity, and balance. So a lot to grab onto there. But this piece right here was one of my favorite from this series. It was my senior thesis work from college. And this is one singular piece from 4 angles. So I built up a slip texture on it with a spray gun. And then once that dried, I was able to actually spray like glaze color from different pointed angles of this piece. And it created all this really amazing micro texture on the piece. So when you spray from one side or another, you get millions of little microscopic bubbles coming off that color on either side. So as you move around it, you can almost not quite tell where the shift is happening or what color the piece is, because you're seeing multiple colors at once as you move from different angles. This is another one from that series I was very fond of. Looks like we're not quite centered on the screen there. Sorry about that. No worries. Anyhow, so this is another piece. This is the same piece here from front and back, showing how those little micro pieces of material can pick up so much color and create a lot of change as you moved around it. After college, I ended up going back to Vermont for a while, not too long before the pandemic hit. I graduated in 2019, and within about 6 months, I was kind of shut down where I was. I wasn't able to apply to too many things. The lab was closed up. Everybody knows how that went. Don't need to quite get into that. But what happened in my work was a lot of my color kind of exited for a while. I pared everything down and was really focusing on like how much could I create with just black, white, red, yellows, and blues. It felt like everything else around you was kind of closing. There was no social life happening. I was in Vermont in the winter. At first time I've been back in Vermont in the winter in 4 years, and there you go, and now I'm here for the pandemic. So I just felt very locked down, and as a response to that, I decided to just take color out and make myself work through tougher constructs. And in working in these constructs where I had less available to me, I found that it was able to kind of carry me through that period of time, if that makes any sense. But I was able to kind of push through a lot of ideas that were just in black and white, which looking back, the work feels very tight for me, but I really needed to do this work. This piece is about kind of connection and kind of losing connection with people that you're really close with during that time. And the idea of like reaching out and not receiving, and just like non-reciprocal communication. You can see from either end things line up in strange ways, lines line up, but not everything quite lines up the way you expect it to. And I think that that's a common theme that we all have experienced in the past couple of years. I was really kind of making work that was using these stark colors, and decided to kind of let the street influence pierce its way into a little bit, which is in the newer work. So this is one of the pieces that I have in a show here. And this is a train station in Boston that I was at about 6 months ago that really struck me when I ran into it. And I couldn't find pretty much any information on who built this or who the artist was behind this whole train station. But it just had a little bit of everything in it that I like in my work. And so that was just a moment that meant a lot to me when I ran into this place. I'd actually created this piece before I ran into this, this train station. So it felt very serendipitous. That being said, here are some other works that I'd already created, having run into that train station. And again, kind of playing with illusion, playing with functionality, and just kind of taking those primaries into very simple, strict directions. I started making some cast pieces as well at that time, kind of staying to these constructs of really constricted colors. This is a mold that I made of a cup and a saucer, and I made the little separate handle molds for a few different effects. Again, with the idea being creating this kind of illusion in the piece, this loftiness in the piece. I was thinking a lot about like the work of Ron Nagel while making this stuff, keeping really tight with it. And even people like Ken Price, although I could only, I couldn't relate to Ken, but he's too good. But yeah, a lot of this stuff was really just, it's the same form, same mold over and over, and treating the mug as a canvas, really, and pushing it in each direction as a canvas. something happened. I got sick of the color that the construct, so I was ready to move a little bit and move along. And these are the earlier colors that I was really working with. And I said one day, I said, no, I'm just gonna bring a spray gun out and we're gonna go do a big orange-purple piece. And this is right at the time of the JWS, the James Webb Space Telescope had just been launched at this time. And I was really thinking a lot about like what that lens is going to see for us. And the idea of being like the little checkerboard on the left being Earth and being the playing field that we're all doing our thing on, bopping on. You can't go across that edge. But the James Webb can reach a lot further than we can, right? So the Webb is, my rendition of the James Webb is the little dot that's in the mug. It's the handle of the mug. It's jumped past that checkerboard and it's entered the twilight zone of that mug, the light, right? So that's maybe a bit far out, but we're artists here. So that's what that piece meant to me. It was called Travelers.
We love the James Webb.
We love the James Webb every day, making us humble, that's for sure. Again, that color scheme ended up taking over, and I had no choice. Well, these are very run out on the screen, I apologize about that. But again, very strong, very bright, using the colors of day and night and that transitional time, and that I really find to be beautiful, the dusk and dawn of the days. And since I'm no good at chess, I thought I can make a good chessboard. Right? you can't play the game, make the game. Anyway, this work all led me to really going for my residency and going for, I built this whole body of work and I was ready to apply it to something. The pandemic was still ongoing, but I just needed to get out of my own zone and find a new place to be. And in 2021, I did a big road trip around the country where I first showed up at the Morean Center for clay. And I just drove straight down there and stopped on the front door and went and shook hands with the boss and talked to everybody there. And I kept traveling for a few months. The residency period wasn't quite open yet. But when I applied back about 6 months later, I ended up getting the residency. So this place really was kind of the spot that made all this work happen. I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere that I am right now without having gotten this residency with the Morean Center. Some of the earlier pieces that I was thinking about, you can imagine coming from Vermont in a pandemic down to Saint Pete. It's about the furthest opposite you could have gone in a 1,500-mile trip. It just felt great. I just felt great for the first time in a long time. And this piece especially is called Breezy Days. And it's just about the feeling of like that air hitting your legs in St. Pete when you're from a cold place, right? You're like, oh man, like it feels like the warm weather's licking you, and it just felt so nice and almost like embarrassing that I feel like it was too much, So this is a bit of a commemorative piece to that feeling, and trying to create things that make me happy rather than the stark, straight, black and whites, red, yellow, blues, just the same rule. I wanted to really push into these things that made me happy, made me excited. These forms that were exaggerated, that had a Dr. Seuss element to them. Big early influence of mine as an illustrator. So this piece really started to capture that. But it also started to do some stuff where the base was creating the scene, the setting. And it was kind of starting to wrap up around the pieces and give it this kind of cavernous place to live, and I'd seen that before. I'd seen that all about in many, many hydrants. I tried to pick just a few, because I could bore you all day with all my photos of fire hydrants. But these hydrants they were so interesting to me in how they don't seem as though they're being engulfed or being covered or being eaten by their surroundings. They seem as though they're really emerging from them. And with the hydrant being a form that we all think of as just the dog's toilet, it meant a lot to me to be finding these things emerging from their settings rather than being squashed or eaten or decaying in them. Even if they were decaying in them, oftentimes they're proudly pushing their chests out from the surroundings. So I wanted to kind of start to emulate that. And this is a a photograph of my piece. It's in the show, I Didn't Forget You. That kind of shows that emergence that I was first kind of experiencing after I finally fired this thing. I was able to put these delicate elements together. And finished. It wasn't that quick. Which is just, the Instagram, snap your finger and it's done. Man, that's a superpower right there. But again, just the idea of these things emerging from rather than being consumed by their surroundings was really it was kind of empowering for me in a way. It was a way for me to kind of get out of my own head and be like, all right, well, these things are all beat up too, just the way we all are. Stop moping around and get to work, They're working still, whether or not they know that they're rusting away into the ground. So again, a lot of it is about personifying the objects, creating this relatability with them, which makes me feel a little crazy, but it makes this stuff happen too. So this was one of my first ones where I started to kind of introduce the flowers into it. You'll notice that funny seam on the left side. I forgot to poke a hole between one cap to the base area of the tube that I built this piece with, and I had the end pop off during the firing. I dug back into my old glaze formulas and I found a silicon carbide glaze with cobalt in it that would puff up and create all these gemmy looking bubbles. And I thought, what a perfect opportunity to create a big gloopy seam on the side of this thing, right? Keep it going for another day. So that's this guy, and I really like that embellishment. I think it adds funny to it. Glad it didn't happen twice, but again, these things emerging from their settings, emerging from their surroundings. And then this piece, I kind of had come in towards the dead of the summer when you could not step out of a building for 10 minutes. And it was just melting all the time. And I said, all right, I have to make a hydrant about it. So these are some photos of some of the drippy, over-applied paints on some of the hydrants around Saint Pete, and on the right, a bit of a close-up on the melting / dripping of my hydrant, with the idea that it's getting hot, even the hydrants are melting. So that, again, kind of personifying these objects, these items, giving them their own stories. If I'm feeling that way, the hydrant's feeling that way with me. A lot of my work comes from illustrations. I do a lot in Procreate, just sketching and designing things. This piece right here, this is the first little drawing that ever existed as, working into its Leatherheart stage there in the background. But I just, again, illustratively, I really find it important to just do little sketches. I leave a lot of room in my actual making process for improvisation. A piece will start as simple as that and end up like this. So I want to leave a lot of room for stuff like that to happen. This building, this building was one of the first buildings that I took a photo of in Saint Pete. And as I'm digging through my archives, I'm finding things like this. And it couldn't be, it was funny, I could not remember where this picture was for so long. I had to go and dig and find it. I know there's a building that I remember was red and black checkered. But there it is. And the idea behind this piece, bringing that illusion in my work that I really love to display back into the work, is really just the idea behind the hydrant being this object that's overseen, overlooked, and hidden in plain sight. So I have a little section that I just wanted to read from my artist statement, which kind of relates to that. So this series shines a light on fire hydrants. Throughout the last year, I've dedicated my practice work to more carefully observing the aesthetics of this family of utilitarian objects hiding in plain sight in the city of Saint Pete. It became a game to find an older model or a unique formal decision as I explored the city after moving from Vermont. This curiosity spread amongst friends and began to percolate. I received photos from friends and family traveling all over, sharing odd iterations of this form that they notice. There's been a social reaction to my fascination that has sparked curiosity in this critical piece of infrastructure beyond my own. Hydrants reflect the design of the period they are from, and in that way, they are time capsules which display the evolution of design and industrial aesthetics. They hide in every corner of society, but are publicly accessible to everybody. They occupy the space between what we pay attention to, silently serving their duty. We interact with them daily, if only in passing, yet never truly notice or observe them. So that's really speaking to this hydrant particularly, and this idea behind a hydrant. It's hidden in plain sight, and I hope people will find the hydrants hidden in plain sight in their own lives and in their own neighborhoods, because they're really everywhere. On the end of the illusion, more of it is tucked into the work. I really like messing with photos and iterating off of my pieces and imagining things stretched into different perspectives. This piece I was really going for wide with, trying to make it as wide as possible. And when you were to stretch this photo from side to side, you get a more normal proportioned hydrant. This was far more kind of visible in this tall piece here, which I call Tall Boy. It's kind of got the colors of a PBR can. This is my inspiration on it. It's actually based off of the Sarasota fire hydrant that's not too far from here, so it's the closest one to the center. So I can tell you which direction you have to hunt. But there's one very close, and it's very similar to this. But when you take this image and you stretch this one down vertically, you get a much more normal sized hydrant. So I was just kind of messing with this stuff on my own and thinking, like, how can I push these illusory boundaries myself, and will they be successful? There was a lot of failures in all of this work in the past year. So every decision I was making had a lot of weight on it for me, but also was like, I'm shooting in the dark for a lot of this stuff. I'm learning as I'm going, and I think that's really important in my work, to always be pushing where I'm going and not staying too stagnant on a body of work. You'll notice my work definitely goes in a lot of directions. Working on being better about keeping focused areas for my work to kind of exist within and compartmentalizing a little bit more. At the same time, letting everything smash together has created a lot of interest in my pieces as well, and for me. So it's a bit of a battle there, which I'll talk more about into the next pieces. So in 2020, I took my life savings and bought a little pickup truck and built up the back of it, so a comfy little bed. That's my industrial design brother in the back, pretending to doing a little product photo shoot. He's using the little bench that he just made. But this little vehicle would kind of take me around the country, and kind of brought me out of that kind of real isolated place that I felt I was with both my work and in my social life and everything else. And the connection between the hydrants and the truck, really, most of it is the idea behind this machine, and these machines and this intelligent design in all of this. And in the hydrants that are in the other room, there's all these little decisions, informal decisions that are made in them. Just as there are in a piece of technology like an old pickup truck. And I got really acquainted with this pickup truck as I drove around the country, and it broke down on me just about every other state. And it never killed me. Somehow it seemed like it was just bringing me to the edge of almost dying a couple of times. I got caught in derecho, an inland hurricane that was in Iowa, which was the weirdest thing you can imagine. But I hit a deer, I popped a tire, I had 3 fuel pumps die on me. I was pretty much holding on to dear life in this truck. I spent a week and a half in a parking lot in Iowa after that hurricane came through, just sleeping in my truck, waiting for service to turn back on for anywhere within 100 miles. So this truck kind of became this thing that was like, I hated it so much and I loved it so much, because like I would have died so many times if I didn't have it, but it almost killed me so many times. But it took me to some really amazing places, and when I think back on that trip, it brought me to a lot of realizations, and it also just like made me a stronger person. And as I am focusing on all these pieces of equipment and technology, I just had to create some homage to my truck, which took me to all these places, which helped me get all these photos of these objects and items around the country. So this is the photo of my truck in Red Rocks, and that is, in Hartman Rocks in Colorado. And that's me on the road, on the move. So this is, when it was working, I was moving fast. So this is kind of a piece that just really harkens back to those days where I'm just like slapping on the wheel, on the road again, you know, everything's good, we're moving. So just bringing a little bit of that joy that I experienced over this turbulent period to everybody, in the way that I felt it. This piece happened. It happened after Florida Heat last year. I had the privilege and opportunity of watching John Balistreri hand building some of his large sculpture pieces at the Morean Center for Clay as he came down for a demonstration and for our Florida Heat Conference, which is currently going on right now. Our kiln's at 2,000 degrees currently. But I just really observed how he built his large pieces. He does these very large scale, wide sculptural pieces that are 6+ feet tall at times. It just takes so much knowledge of the medium to be able to kind of start to execute something on that scale. And I just watched him really closely as he built things and took a lot of close notes, and immediately went to the studio and started on this piece, which was a whole roller coaster in and of itself. But it was the largest piece that I've ever attempted, and I learned a tremendous amount in making of it. But this is really kind of speaking to some earlier influences. Stephen Montgomery, who's a very amazing, prominent ceramicist, and happens to be Christina's elementary school teacher growing up. Amazing artist. I've pretty much been looking at his work since I showed up at undergrad in 2016. So again, serendipity there a little bit, having been reached out to, and Christine's like, oh yeah, you know, it reminds me of Stephen Montgomery's work. I said, wow, what a compliment, thank you. So, you know who that is? I said, yes. She said, oh, that was my teacher growing up. And my jaw dropped. Anyway, he's an incredible maker from Detroit who focuses a lot on detritus and the Flint water crisis, the pieces on the far right, and toxicity, and he uses a lot of slipcasting as well in his work. And I really kind of would love to be able to emulate or achieve that level of sophistication in my work someday. He's amazing, he's incredible. However, this is where we are for now. But that being said, this is that glaze again that was showing up in the work all the way back in undergrad. And it starts to climb through my work into the future here. And this piece specifically, it's called A Love Affair with Fire. And A Love Affair with Fire is pretty much about what we're going through consistently as a human culture, and that we need to consistently be pushing towards the brink of the next extinction, or a bigger war, or more bombs, or more what have you. And this piece is kind of a, let me just look at the notes real quick. This piece is, it's a bit of a warning in my opinion. The way that I created it is that it's like an artifact from a future that hasn't happened yet. Showing these hydrants and seeing them, every time you see them, they're strong, they're sturdy, they're staying still. They never have a hole in them like this. They're not that far gone yet. But someday in a future that either we belong to or we don't, hydrants are going to look something like this. So for me, this is a bit on the darker end of the work. It's hard for me to talk about this one because I don't want to be that dark. I don't want to be pessimistic, but as a maker, I think we're always thinking about this, about where are things going, why are we doing this? What's the point anyway if we're all going to go up in flames in the next 6 months, you know? Too dark, sorry. Anyhow, this piece is a bit of a warning for me, and it's something I spent a very long time kind of pushing through these surfaces. It was in and out of our front-loading kiln 5 times. And it's over 160 pounds. So each time in, each time out, you're just being very careful about every little aspect of it. And just slowly building these surfaces up, layer by layer, adding black underglaze first, then an iron oxide layer, then a yellow and orange washed layer on top of that. And then towards the end, that big effects glaze that brings in, you know, the real punch to it. Another thing that you'll see in all of the work is that I signed my name very strongly. And this signature kind of, it's my last name, and it's something that I decided to do after witnessing Betty Woodman's work on my road trip in my little truck. And it happened, it was during one of my breakdowns. I got towed to North Dakota somewhere. I was in this little town, and my mom knew all about it. The first time I texted her in a week since I just got service again finally after being broken down. She said, "Oh, I looked up some things that you can do in town. There's a little art museum in town." I'm like, "Mom, I'm like sleeping in the parking lot of a Toyota dealership in the middle of North Dakota. I guarantee the art museum is." I should have held my tongue. The art museum was great. It was really, really good. I went over there and they had all these amazing sculptural pieces, and they had a couple of pieces by Betty Woodman, who had a solo show there in the 90s. And I was at this point of just being like beat down and broken after the week and a half of being almost dead in my truck. And I'm sitting in front of a Betty Woodman, and I started crying, you know? It's like, Betty Woodman was my professor's teacher in college. And it was like, all these things, how much would have had to come together for me to end up in that gallery right there? And the curator came out and started talking to me and saw that I was clearly like, oh my God, how did I just walk into a gallery with my professor's teacher's work sitting in front of me? And he went, wait a minute, and went downstairs and came back up, and he had a little booklet that was from her solo show. It was her exhibition catalog. It was in plastic and everything. He said, somebody tried to come by and buy all these about 10 years ago. So I didn't let him. So you can have them and take it with you. So he gave me that. He gave me a catalog from the show and a permanent collection as well. And it was just a moment where, like, I'm so glad that truck broke down where it broke down and left me in that town, you know, because it all worked out for a reason in the end. And I try to, again, as I say, when I have this big piece that's about death and destruction and the uncertainty in life, I still know that there's plenty of those moments just like that waiting for you when things get tricky. So finally, I'm getting to this work, which is my self-portrait. It's something I've spent a long time kind of contemplating how to take on a self-portrait. I think everything you make is a self-portrait in the end. So representing figurally, it's something I've always done through drawing, but to really take that by clay is this area. I'm a figural sculptor. And it was hard for me to kind of wrap my head around that, wrap my mind around that. Starting on a smaller scale was really exciting for me. Kind of gave me the same feel that it would be like working on a mug scale. But I was looking at the work of Andrea Keys O'Connell at the time. She'd spent a little time at the Morean Center doing some figural demos. And she was just fantastic in how she worked and the speed at which she worked. So I really started pushing towards more of this stuff. And this is just the beginning of a long series of these, I hope. I've got some more planned. But this piece for me is really, it's about kind of, as a creative, you're holding a flame, right? You're tending this flame. And it's a potent thing to be tending because it's something that it can cause you so much joy and so much excitement in your life. But it can also not take care of you sometimes. You know, it's easy to get obsessed. It's easy to get addicted, to get tied into this work in a way that's unhealthy. And as a creator, I've witnessed that in my friends and my fellow undergraduates from that time. And I feel like I've seen people decay in a way around me through being creative. And so this is a piece that's speaking to that. It's speaking to my balance of my own creativity and how I'm working on it still. The pipes are the hydrants, right? And I'm emerging from the hydrants as the hydrants emerge from grass. The flowers are covered in that toxic glaze that I love so much that I haven't gotten away from for years. And they're beautiful, but they're toxic, and I like having them around, but I can't have them too close. And the flame, obviously, the boy is enamored. And the boy in this work, in this analogy, is kind of the monkey on your back, the creative in you that wants to go in every direction and kick everything. I akin him to, he lights everything on fire. And he doesn't care if it burns him, he doesn't care if it lights the whole building on fire, he's gonna light everything on fire that he can light on fire. So this is me kind of dealing with that idea and that feeling of just like the compulsivity that goes with creating, and the energy that goes with it. And the love and the kind of, the love of it, really, and how to manage that and stay creative. You see the sunset from Washington State that inspired a lot of the work about the analogy with the boy, which I'm excited to push more in the future. I have a firefighter too, and I have a miner, coal miner, and a few other characters that I'm hoping to use as these symbols for speaking through some narratives I'm interested in. So that's basically what I have for most of this talk on the show. Moving forward, I've done this work since the opening, actually. These are all bugs. I needed to push into some small work again, the compulsivity to keep making this. I went back to the studio a day after the show opening, and I was working again. But you'll see even on the last piece, the pipes in the base, right? And the pipes on love. So things are starting to climb together, and I want to bring more of these hydrants into kind of a more functional realm as well, so people can access them and can have a piece of the work as well. I know that the sculptural work is often inaccessible for a lot of folks price range-wise, which is completely understandable. So I'm really excited about this new series of smaller pieces that I've kind of pushed through, which give people some ownership of the work, and so that they can have one of their own. And then this one, which has the chain links on it. So these are all little, like, half-inch links that are only about that big each. So that one was fun. If you guys are interested in following along more, I've included my socials here at the end that you can just scan with your phone. You should be able to scan with your phone. I hope the resolution is up there. But that's where I'll be online. And again, I just thank you everybody for coming in. I really appreciate the time and that everybody gave me to kind of speak on what I'm doing, and happy to take any questions.
What is slip casting?
All right. So slip casting is pretty much a process where, and you'll see it like the old old ornaments. There's a lot of old things that are made in this technique, but it's pretty much you start with a mold, a plaster mold, and you have clay in a format that's actually like more like pourable. It's like yogurt almost. I don't know how to. Pretty much you fill up a mold with slip rather than hard clay. And the slip fills the mold up, it builds a wall from the plaster, sucking the moisture out of the clay slip, and then you pour out what's left in the mold, and you end up with just the shell of the inside of the mold. You can pop that apart, but you can make your own molds. So a lot of slip casting and mold making that I've done has been really just learning how to make molds really well, so that you can have any kind of form that you can take a mold off of, and then slip cast that positive over and over the same.
Talk about planning for failure.
Yeah.
How many textiles do you make? How many pieces do you make multiples of each? Let's say you're working on a hydrant at a time. Do you make multiples at one time in case one fails in the kiln or somewhere along the way, or
Yeah, so the way I usually go about it is I like to have like 3 pieces going at a time of the medium to large size ones, and less of that is about failure of things in the kiln, and it's more about not getting too stale on something as I'm working on it. But I would say when it comes to actually like failure and the breakage, I've made probably like a solo show and a half's worth of pieces for this solo show, and lost about half of those. I had a big issue at the beginning of my year last year where I used a reclaimed material that had bits of plaster in it from the studio. Somebody chunked some plaster in there. I made about 4 pieces before firing, before I really got to that, because I just was like, all right, let's go. I got 300 pounds of clay here. Awesome. Just made 4 pieces, went to fire all those up, and didn't know until about a month later that they were problematic. When I started to glaze them, the plaster or whatever it was inside absorbed water and then started to pop the surfaces off.
Oh no.
So I actually couldn't tell until, I didn't know it was happening until like a month after the pieces had dried and I was getting to glazing. And I was standing there and go, wait, that one's doing it too, that one's doing it, that one's doing it. It was a bad couple of days there when that happened.
Yeah.
The big one specifically, I had a different kind of failure on it originally, which was really interesting to me. And it'll show it in one of these here. So you can kind of see, oops, it's here. This bend that you have in it right here is warping.
Mm-hmm.
So I had it up on a big tripod, spinning turntable, screw in the nut on the side to keep it at the right height, and the nut failed. Well, I was about 100 pounds in. So it was about up to here. The nut failed, thing fell straight down until the bottom of it just hit the ground, and it went boom, like that. And I was like about to drag the piece off in my reclaim bin, and my friend came like, stop, it's interesting. She's like, go home, come back tomorrow. Like, all right, and came back tomorrow, and I was like, it's not bad, actually. It's way better than it would have been before. And so I kept it, and I kept pushing through it. And like this all the scalloping on it was done after that had all happened. It wasn't like I'd gotten that far and like lost a lot of surface. It wasn't like I 30 hours into this thing, oh man, I have to keep, like, no, it was just, I liked how it kind of had pushed in that direction. And that really sparked my interest in wanting to push the warpiness and the kind of like bulbous nature and that kind of Dr. Seuss feel in this work. And it isn't a hydrant, it's a representation of hydrant. You know, they don't need to be hydrants. They aren't hydrants. You know, they're representations. They're characters. They're personalities, and they're flawed, and they should be. And so this one, it really meant a lot that made it through, and it also really sparked the idea to kind of keep pushing for those funkier forms. I think it would have been a pretty boring show if they're all straight representations off of the exact hydrants that I found out in the wild. Which my brain wanted to do that. I wanted so badly to just take a photo from front, side, top, bring it into the studio, draw it all out on the wall, right? And design it all out, get it perfect, figure out what your shrinkage is, figure out all your surfaces ahead of time, do 10, 15 test styles. That wasn't about what the work was for me. It was about like letting these things express themselves and letting myself be freer with it. So yeah, that's the story of this big piece here. As much anxiety is instilled within it, it's got it really sparked a lot of other joyous pieces for me.
Silly question.
Yes.
So you were looking for hydrants, and you had your friends sending you pictures and things like that. Did you go to the fire department and find out they had a map of hydrants in the city?
Yes, but that took the fun out of it. It's like knowing that you go on the crossword game and figure it all out the next day. Yeah, no, I know. In fact, my friend texted me. He'd jump on the back of my bike. I have an electric bike. He's like, all right, we're going for a trip. And we just ride around town. He'd jump off the back, take a photo, jump back on, keep going, you know. And so that's kind of some of the fun in it, is that it was this activity of being able to explore your city and giving yourself permission to be like a kid and be stupid and go and find stuff that's interesting.
But it would be interesting to find out, like, what's the plot for that? Like, there must be a plot of some sort where they have to be every so many feet based on the density of the neighborhood and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that you had a fireman or a miner or something? That's something you're working
Oh
on?
yeah, so I have like a fireman that chases the boy around and puts out the fires.
Okay.
I have like a coal miner who's the one that's always down in the hole. He's the guy that made this piece here. Always grumpy and pessimistic, but he's got some good qualities. He needs to be down there working. And then there's an astronaut, and the astronaut doesn't touch any of this stuff. He's up doing his thing, and he's in his spaceship, and everything's lined up the way it should be up there. And don't let the boy anywhere near the spaceship. And so yeah, they're a bit nebulous at the moment. I have some nice stories that go along with them all. But they all represent aspects of my creativity that I want to put a label on so that I can create work about kind of a struggle in creativity and the joyous aspects of it as well, but through these characters. And removing myself, I feel like when I make work like the self-portrait work, I hate making work that's me. Like, I don't want to be on the front of it. I don't like being... So that was forcing myself really to say, put yourself right in front of it, you know, and put yourself in the center of what you love and what's hard and what's difficult. And so yeah, I think that those characters are going to allow me to be able to speak more, be more fluid creatively, and be more open with my work without having to be me doing it necessarily. You know, it's all me, but let them do the work. You know, with these characters.
They can be your avatars and do
That's right.
places.
That's right. Yep.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Of course.
Well, I know you have a show coming up at the Morean.
Mhm.
When is that opening?
That will be in May. I don't have the exact dates yet, but it's the month of May at the Morean Center.
In the Art Center?
Yep, right in the main gallery at the Art Center. Yep. So I'll be taking that over. I have a whole bunch of ideas that I'm excited to kind of get into here. And more slip casting work. One of my goals moving out of the Morean Center is to have a nice batch of molds made to do more of these hydrant mugs. I'm throwing them all by hand right now. I've made a rib. Actually, I have an old skateboard that has the shape of the bump on the mug. So it's just, again, using found stuff and old things to make tools. But I'm making them all by hand right now, and it is fun, don't get me wrong, but I would rather just figure out a way to kind of push through those in the same way that I did with the cup and saucer pieces that were very strict, the same form over and over. Now iterate color, iterate illustration, all that. So I really want to put together a nice batch of mold-made work for May, coming May, and then to move on into my own studio space with all those molds and be able to kind of hit the ground running. So that's the goal.
In Florida? You're gonna stay in Florida?
Yep, at the moment that's what I'm planning on. I think Saint Petersburg is just a really cool place to kind of make it happen right now with just how fast I've seen the city grow, like around me. I've seen so many buildings going up, and there has to be plenty of nice apartments that need some nice artwork. So I'm gonna stick around for that, and I think it's a great place to make a career happen. So I've got a lot of great colleagues too. The Morean Center, I just tout how amazing our staff are over there, my fellow residents, my director, our gallerist, Molly, our director, Cody. He's just amazing. They're people that you want to have in your creative life forever. So I don't see any reason to need to move on for people I'm around, the place that I'm in. And I'm really just excited to continue to practice my craft and make some of these bigger pieces for my exit show as well. So, some bigger ones, a little bit more narrative, and we'll have a whole bunch of mold-made work too. So,
Fantastic. That's really great.
Thank you so much, Ethan.
thank you. I appreciate it.